If I could go back in time, I would tell myself one thing. Never let envy into your heart. It will blind you, it will poison you, and it will make you destroy the people you love most. I betrayed my best friend for a promise of wealth and power, but what I got instead was something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. This is my story, a story of betrayal, guilt, and the road to redemption. But before you judge me, ask yourself this. What would you do if temptation whispered in your ear? In the quiet village of Ilaayo, two boys grew up together like the roots of the same tree, intertwined, inseparable, and as close as brothers. Olajide and Afolabi were their names. From the day they could walk, they ran side by side through the dusty paths of the village, climbed the tall palm trees for their sweet fruit, and splashed together in the cool waters of the stream. Wherever you saw one, the other was not far behind. If Afolabi was pounding yam in his father's compound, Olajide would be there beside him, teasing him about how slow he was. If Olajide was helping his mother carry firewood from the forest, Afolabi would appear, laughing as he picked up the heavier load. But even the closest bonds can carry cracks. Afolabi was blessed. His family owned the largest yam fields in Ilaayo. They had wealth, influence, and the respect of the entire village. Olajide, on the other hand, came from a family that struggled to make ends meet. His father's farmland was small, the soil not as fertile. Often, there was not enough food to go around. It wasn't something Olajide ever said out loud, but as the years went by, the difference between them became harder to ignore. He loved Afolabi like a brother, but every time he visited his friend's home and saw the large baskets of yams, the clean compound, and the full pots of soup, something heavy settled in his chest. And every time Afolabi handed him a yam to take home to his family, it was like that heaviness turned into a quiet shame. Still, their friendship held strong, and they shared everything: stories, meals, dreams. Under the great Iroko tree in the center of the village, they swore an oath of brotherhood one warm evening. Afolabi cut his palm with a sharp stone, and Olajide did the same. With their blood dripping onto the dry earth, they clasped hands. "Whatever happens," Afolabi said, "we will always stand by each other." "I swear it." "And I swear it too," Olajide replied. The village elders often say that oaths made under the Iroko tree reach the ears of the gods themselves. But sometimes, even oaths are not enough to hold a man back from temptation. One night, as the moonlight bathed the quiet village, Olajide sat outside his family's hut. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, but their beauty only reminded him of how small and trapped he felt. His family was inside, asleep on their thin mats, while his stomach growled in hunger. He clenched his fists, staring out at the dark path ahead, wishing for a way out of this life. That was when he saw the man. The stranger walked with slow, deliberate steps, his agbada flowing behind him like water in the wind. Olajide had never seen him before, and yet there was something unsettlingly familiar about him. The man stopped a few paces away and smiled. His teeth gleamed in the moonlight, too white, too perfect. "Olajide," the man said. His voice was smooth, deep, and strangely soothing. "Who are you?" Olajide asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. The man ignored the question. "You have a restless spirit. You dream of more, don't you? More than this dusty hut, more than these endless struggles. You want to rise, to be free, to live the life you were born to live." Olajide frowned. "How do you know me? What do you want?" The man stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. "I am someone who can help you, Olajide. I can give you everything you've ever wanted: wealth, power, respect. All you have to do is follow my advice." Olajide's heart began to race. He didn't trust this man, but the words were like honey dripping into his ears. "What advice?" The stranger's smile widened. "It is simple. There is someone standing in your way, someone casting a shadow over you. That someone is your friend, Afolabi." Olajide froze. "Afolabi, what are you talking about? He's my brother." "Is he?" the man asked, tilting his head. "Or is he the reason you are stuck where you are? Look at him, with his father's land, his full stomach, his easy life. As long as Afolabi stands, you will remain in his shadow. But if you bring him down, you will rise." Olajide shook his head, his palms growing sweaty. "I can't betray him. He's my friend." "Friendship," the man said, laughing softly. "What has this friendship brought you? Has it filled your belly? Has it lifted your family out of this poverty? Think, Olajide. The gods only help those who help themselves. For a long moment there was silence. The night air felt heavier, and even the crickets seemed to have stopped chirping. "What do you want me to do?" Olajide asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The stranger leaned closer, his eyes gleaming. "Disgrace him. Ruin his name. Make the villagers turn against him. Once he falls, everything he has will become yours." Olajide swallowed hard. His heart was a storm of confusion, fear, and temptation. The man placed a hand on his shoulder, and it was cold, like stone. "Think about it," the stranger said. "I will come to you again, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this do not wait forever." And with that, the man walked away, disappearing into the darkness, as though he had never been there. That night, Olajide didn't sleep. He stared at the thatched roof of his hut. The stranger's words were playing in his mind. Outside, the iroko tree swayed in the wind, its branches creaking as if whispering a warning. As the first light of dawn broke over the village, Olajide made his decision. "I will do it," he whispered. And so the seed of betrayal was planted. And though Olajide did not know it yet, the gods had already begun to stir. The morning after Olajide's decision was like any other in Ile-Ayo. The sun rose slowly, casting a golden glow over the yam fields, the thatched roofs of the huts, and the bustling marketplace where women sold fresh peppers and smoked fish. Children laughed as they chased one another along the narrow paths, and the elders sat under the iroko tree, chewing kola nuts and speaking of the old days. But for Olajide, the day felt heavy. He couldn't shake the memory of the stranger's words or the cold touch of his hand. Each step he took felt like it echoed louder than usual, as though the earth itself knew what he had agreed to do. Afolabi greeted him warmly that morning, as he always did. "Jide, have you eaten?" Afolabi asked, handing him a roasted yam wrapped in banana leaves. "My father's farm produced too much again this week. Take some to your family." Olajide hesitated for a moment before accepting the food. His stomach growled, but it wasn't hunger that twisted inside him. It was guilt. "Thank you," he said, forcing a smile. "You're always too generous." "It's nothing," Afolabi said, laughing. "What's mine is yours. We've always shared, haven't we?" Olajide nodded, but his throat felt dry. He thought of the stranger's words. Disgrace him. Ruin his name. How could he? Afolabi was like a brother to him. But then, like a shadow creeping across his heart, the envy returned. The roasted yam in his hand was a gift, but it was also a reminder of his dependence. Afolabi was strong, secure, and respected, while Olajide was struggling, powerless. By the time the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Olajide's mind was in turmoil. He wandered to the edge of the village where the forest began. There, he sat on a fallen log, staring into the dense green shadows. The stranger appeared again, as though he had been waiting. His agbada was as pristine as it had been the night before, untouched by the dust of the village paths. "You've been thinking," the stranger said, his voice smooth and knowing. Olajide didn't respond. "Your silence tells me everything," the man continued. "You want to say no, but deep down, you know what you must do. You've seen it, haven't you? The way the villagers look at Afolabi, with admiration, with respect, and then the way they look at you, with pity. Is that the life you want, Olajide? To always live in his shadow?" Olajide clenched his fists. "What do you want from me?" "It's not about what I want," the stranger said. "It's about what you want. I'm only here to help you take what you deserve." The words hit Olajide like a drumbeat. The truth was, he did want more. He wanted respect, power, and freedom from the chains of poverty. But the thought of betraying Afolabi still felt like swallowing hot embers. "I can't just ruin him," Olajide said, his voice shaky. "He's done nothing to me." "Nothing?" The stranger raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? Every time he gives you food, do you not feel smaller? Every time he calls you brother, does it not sting, knowing you are not truly his equal? He may not say it, but he pities you, Olajide. Is that what you want from life? To be pitied?" Olajide's breathing quickened. The stranger's words were like arrows, each one hitting its mark. He hated to admit it, but there was truth in them. Afolabi's generosity, though well-meaning, often felt like a reminder of all the things Olajide lacked. "What do I have to do?" Olajide asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The stranger smiled. "It's simple. Plant doubt in the hearts of the villagers. Let them see Afolabi not as a golden boy, but as someone greedy, selfish, unworthy of their trust. If you speak, they will listen. All it takes is a few whispers, a few well-placed rumors, and Afolabi will fall. His family's wealth, his land, his respect, they will all be yours. Olajide swallowed hard. And if I do this, you promise I'll have everything I want? Everything and more, the stranger said, his voice as smooth as oil. You will rise, Olajide, and when you rise, you will finally be free. For a long moment, Olajide sat in silence, staring at the ground. He thought of his family, struggling to eat every day. He thought of his dreams of a better life, of escaping Ile-Ayo and living like a king. And then he thought of Afolabi, the friend who had shared everything with him, who had never asked for anything in return. The stranger leaned closer. The choice is yours, but remember, opportunities like this do not wait forever. Olajide looked up, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with a mixture of fear and determination. I'll do it, he said. The stranger smiled, his teeth gleaming. Good. Then let the work begin. And with that, he disappeared into the shadows of the forest, leaving Olajide alone with the weight of his decision. When Olajide returned to the village that evening, he found Afolabi sitting under the Iroko tree, carving a small wooden figure. Afolabi looked up and smiled. There you are, Afolabi said. I was starting to wonder where you'd gone. You're quiet today? Is everything all right? Olajide forced a smile. Everything's fine, he said. But as he sat down beside his friend, watching him work, the seed of betrayal was already beginning to sprout in his heart. The night was quiet, but for Olajide, it felt louder than a village festival. His thoughts churned in his mind like a grinding stone, each turn weighing heavier on his heart. He had agreed to betray Afolabi. The word itself tasted bitter. But as the stranger's promises replayed in his mind, wealth, respect, and freedom from his life of struggle, he convinced himself it was the right thing to do. He would plant the seeds of doubt carefully, as the stranger instructed. Quiet whispers, spread like the breeze on a dry day, would soon grow into a fire too big to ignore. The next morning, Olajide rose before the cock crowed. His mother noticed his early rise and asked, Jide, where are you off to this early? Ah, Mama, Olajide said, forcing a smile. I'm just going to the stream before the sun gets too hot. The days are long when you do nothing. His mother nodded, but her eyes lingered on him. Mothers always seem to sense when something is not right. Olajide made his way to the heart of the village, where women were pounding yam in the morning light, their laughter bouncing off the clay walls of their huts. He approached them slowly, his hands tucked behind his back, his face set in an expression of concern. Aunties, he said, bowing his head respectfully, it's good to see all of you working so hard. The village depends on you. The women chuckled. Ah, Olajide, don't come and sweet-talk us. What do you want? Olajide laughed softly, but then he lowered his voice and glanced around as if to make sure no one was listening. Have you noticed anything strange about Afolabi's family? He asked. The women paused, looking at him curiously. Strange? What do you mean? Olajide hesitated, then leaned closer. I don't want to say too much, but isn't it odd how their farm always thrives, even when others struggle? Even during the bad rains last season, their yams were as big as water pots. It's almost as if... He trailed off, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. As if what? One of the women asked, her pestle frozen in midair. Olajide sighed, shaking his head. I'm not saying anything for sure, but some blessings are not natural. The women exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. Are you saying their wealth is not from the gods? I don't know, Olajide said, shrugging. But the gods give and take as they please. If someone's blessings never run dry, it makes you wonder who they're really serving. The women murmured amongst themselves, their pounding slowing as they whispered suspicions back and forth. Olajide smiled inwardly. The first seed had been planted. That afternoon, Olajide made his way to the stream, where the men of the village often gathered to wash their tools and share news. He joined a group of young farmers sitting under the shade of a palm tree, their laughter loud as they teased one another. Ah, Olajide, one of them called. Come and tell us, have you finally found yourself a wife, or will you remain the village bachelor forever? The group burst into laughter, but Olajide smiled and waved them off. A man must make money first before thinking of a wife, he said, sitting down with them. One of the men handed him a gourd of palm wine, and as Olajide took a sip, he glanced at Afolabi's cousin, a a strong young man named Tayo, who often worked on Afolabi's farm. Tayo, Olajide said, his tone light, I hear Afolabi's family has started selling their yams in other villages now. It seems their wealth keeps growing. Tayo nodded proudly. Ah, yes, my uncle's farm is blessed by the gods. No one in Ilayo can compete with our harvests. Olajide tilted his head, pretending to think. But isn't it strange that their farm does so well, even when others struggle? Some people say the gods' blessings are shared evenly. But maybe your family knows a secret the rest of us don't. Tayo frowned. What are you saying? Nothing, Olajide said quickly, raising his hands. I'm just saying that in a village as small as ours, people talk, and sometimes they wonder about things that seem too good to be true. The other men exchanged uneasy looks. What are people saying? One of them asked. Olajide shrugged. I don't want to spread rumors. I respect Afolabi too much for that, but you know how the elders say, when a tree grows too tall, it begins to attract the wind. The group fell quiet, the weight of Olajide's words sinking in. He had not said anything outright, but the doubt he planted began to take root. Over the next few weeks, Olajide continued his quiet work. At the market, at the stream, at the village square, he dropped hints and whispers like seeds into fertile soil. He never spoke directly against Afolabi, but his carefully chosen words did the job. It wasn't long before the villagers began to murmur among themselves. Have you heard about Afolabi's family? They say their farm is too successful. It's unnatural. Do you think they're using something dark? Maybe that's why the gods are punishing the land. The river is drying and the yams are failing. Perhaps the gods are angry with them. The whispers spread like harmattan fire, fueled by suspicion and envy. One evening, as Olajide walked home, he passed Afolabi's compound and saw his friend sitting outside, his head in his hands. Afolabi looked up as Olajide approached, his face tired and confused. Jide, he said, something is happening. The villagers, they don't greet us anymore. They refuse to buy from my father. They act as if we've done something wrong, but I don't understand why. Olajide felt his heart tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. Don't worry, Afolabi, he said. People are just jealous of your family's success. It will pass. Afolabi nodded slowly, but his eyes were filled with doubt. As Olajide walked away, his chest felt heavy. He had planted the seeds of betrayal, and now they were beginning to grow. But instead of pride, all he felt was guilt. For the first time, he wondered if the price of his ambition was too high. The morning sun rose over Ilayo, bathing the village in golden light. Yet, for Afolabi and his family, the warmth of the day seemed to have vanished. Whispers had turned to cold stares, and cold stares had turned to actions. The village that once welcomed them with open arms now treated them like strangers, even enemies. At the marketplace that day, Afolabi's mother, Aduni, arrived as she did every week, carrying a basket of fresh yams. Her back was straight, her steps firm. She had always been proud of her family's work. But when she set her basket down to begin her sales, something unexpected happened. One by one, the women who usually crowded around her to buy her yams stepped away. They muttered excuses, avoided eye contact, and moved on to other sellers. Aduni looked up in confusion. What is happening? She asked, her voice uncertain. Are my yams not as fresh as they were last week? The market women exchanged glances, but no one answered her. Only one voice finally broke the silence, a woman known for her sharp tongue. Fresh yams? Who knows what you've done to grow them so large? Some blessings come from the gods, Aduni, but others come from darker places. The words hit Aduni like a slap. Her chest tightened, but she refused to lose her composure. What are you saying? She asked, her voice rising. My family has worked these fields for generations. Our yams have always been this good. But the women turned away from her, their faces full of suspicion. Aduni's hands shook as she picked up her basket and left the market, her head bowed. The laughter and chatter of the other sellers followed her like a taunt. At the stream, Afolabi's father, Baba Afolabi, faced his own humiliation. He had gone to fetch water, his clay pot balanced on his shoulder, when a group of men gathered nearby began to murmur. Their voices were low at first, but as Baba Afolabi approached, their words became louder, sharper. Look at him, one of the men said, his voice dripping with disdain. He walks with pride as if the gods favor him more than the rest of us. Maybe it's not the gods at all, another man replied. Some say his farm is blessed by other forces. Baba Afolabi stopped and turned to face them, his pot still on his shoulder. If you have something to say to me, say it, he said, his voice firm. The men fell silent, but their eyes said enough. Baba Afolabi's grip on the pot tightened, and he walked away, his heart heavy. By the time Afolabi returned home that evening, the air around his family's compound was thick with unease. His mother sat in the corner, staring at her hands, her basket of unsold yams lying untouched beside her. His father sat on a wooden stool, silent and tense, his face set like stone. Afo, his mother said softly as he entered. What is happening? Why is the village turning against us? Afolabi didn't have an answer. He had spent the day trying to figure it out himself. The children who used to run up to greet him had avoided him instead, their mothers pulling them back with quick warning looks. The elders who once praised his family's farm now ignored him completely. I don't know, Afolabi said, sinking to the ground beside his mother. But it feels like someone has poisoned their minds against us. His father scoffed. The villagers are fools. Jealousy is a disease and it spreads quickly. They cannot stand to see others succeed. Let them talk. But his mother shook her head. It's more than jealousy. There's something deeper here. Something we cannot see. That night, Olajide couldn't sleep. The sound of Afolabi's voice earlier in the day haunted him. Jide, Afolabi had said, it feels like the world has turned against us. Olajide had reassured him with empty words, but now, lying on his mat, he felt the full weight of what he had done. The villagers' whispers had grown louder, and the doubt he planted had bloomed into full-blown mistrust. He had watched Afolabi's family begin to crumble, and yet, instead of satisfaction, he felt a deep unease. He thought of the stranger, of his cold smile and his sharp words, "Bring him down, and you will rise." Olajide sat up in the darkness, his chest tight. Was it worth it? The respect he had gained from the villagers felt hollow. He had turned Afolabi into an outcast, a man without honor, and yet, he could not shake the feeling that something worse was coming. The wind outside rustled the leaves of the Iroko tree, its branches creaking like an old warning. By the end of the week, the damage was complete. Afolabi's family had lost their standing in the village. No one bought their yams, no one greeted them, no one looked them in the eye. The farm, once thriving, now sat empty. It was on a quiet evening, just as the sun was sinking into the horizon, that the final blow came. A group of elders arrived at Afolabi's compound, their faces solemn. Afolabi, one of them said, the village has spoken. Your family is no longer welcome here. Afolabi's mother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. His father stood abruptly, his voice rising in anger. What do you mean? We have done nothing wrong. The elder shook his head. The villagers believe your success has brought misfortune to the land. The yams are failing. The river is drying. They say the gods are punishing Ilayo because of you. This is nonsense. Baba Afolabi shouted. We have done nothing but work hard. Enough, the elder said firmly. The decision has been made. Afolabi's heart sank as he looked around at the faces of the elders, men who had once praised his family and shared palm wine in their compound. Now their eyes were hard, unyielding. We will leave, Afolabi said quietly. His father turned to him in shock, but Afolabi held his gaze. There's no use fighting. If the village does not want us, then we will go. And so, under the cover of dusk, Afolabi's family packed their belongings onto an old cart and left the village. The roads were empty, the silence heavy. Olajide watched from the shadows as they disappeared into the distance. He thought he would feel victorious, but instead his chest burned with shame. The Iroko tree swayed in the wind, its branches bending low as though mourning the loss of the boy who had once sworn an oath beneath its shade. The village of Ilayo was quiet that night, as if the land itself had grown tired of the whispers and suspicions that had filled the air in recent weeks. The moon hung low, casting long shadows across the empty paths, and the only sounds were the occasional cries of crickets and the rustling of the trees. In his small hut, Olajide sat alone. His head was in his hands, and his mind was restless. The image of Afolabi and his family leaving the village replayed in his thoughts like a haunting drumbeat. He had watched from the edge of the road as his closest friend, the one he had sworn to protect, was cast out with nothing but a cart of belongings and a heavy heart. He had wanted to call out to stop them, but his voice had failed him. He thought of Afolabi's mother's tears, the anger on his father's face, and the quiet resignation in Afolabi's eyes. It was done. The seed of betrayal he had planted had grown into a full harvest of ruin. Olajide told himself that it was necessary. The stranger had promised him wealth, power, and respect. And now that Afolabi was gone, the villagers had started to greet him differently. When he walked through the marketplace, they called him wise. The elders had even begun to nod approvingly when he spoke. This was what he had wanted, wasn't it? Then why did he feel so empty? The wind outside his hut began to pick up, rattling the thatched roof. Olajide looked up. The wind sounded different tonight, almost like a whisper. He tried to ignore it, but the sound grew louder, more insistent, like a voice calling his name. Olajide? His heart jumped, and he sat up straight. The voice was faint, but it was clear. It sent a chill crawling up his spine. He turned to the doorway, his eyes wide. The shadow appeared before he saw the man. It stretched long and dark across the ground, creeping into the hut like it had a life of its own. Then, stepping into the dim light of the hut, the stranger appeared, just as he had on that first night. His igbada was pristine, untouched by dust or dirt, and his face carried the same calm smile. But this time there was something different about him. His eyes glimmered with something sharp, something dangerous. "You have done well," the stranger said, his voice smooth and low. "You have played your part perfectly." Olajide swallowed hard. "They're gone," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Afolabi and his family, they left the village tonight." The stranger nodded. "Yes, you have cleared the way for yourself. Now, nothing stands in your path." Olajide's chest tightened. "When will I receive what you promised?" The stranger tilted his head, his smile widening. "Receive? My dear Olajide, you already have. Look around you. The villagers respect you now. They listen to your words. You have taken Afolabi's place in their hearts." Olajide frowned. "But you said I would have wealth, power." "And you will," the stranger interrupted. "But remember, nothing in this life comes freely. Everything has a price." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. What do you mean?" Olajide asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The stranger stepped closer, and the air in the hut seemed to grow colder. His smile, once warm and inviting, now seemed sharp like the edge of a blade. "You planted the seed of betrayal," the stranger said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Now, you must live with the fruit it bears. Wealth and power will come to you, Olajide, but they will not fill the hole you have dug in your heart." Olajide's breathing quickened. "You didn't tell me this before." "Ah," the stranger said, chuckling softly. "But I did. I told you there would be a price. You were just too blinded by your desire to listen." The wind outside howled, and the flame of the small lantern in Olajide's hut flickered wildly. The stranger's shadow seemed to grow, stretching across the walls like a dark wave. "Who are you?" Olajide asked, his voice trembling. The stranger leaned in close, his eyes gleaming like hot coals. "You know who I am," he said. "You've always known." Olajide's mind raced. The man's unnatural presence, his knowledge of Olajide's thoughts, the way he seemed to appear and disappear without a trace, it all pointed to one thing. You're not a man," Olajide whispered. The stranger smiled, his teeth gleaming. "The villagers have a name for me," he said. "Ajogun, the spirit of misfortune." Olajide's blood ran cold. He had heard of the Ajogun in the stories told by the elders. They were spirits that brought calamity, sowed discord, and fed on human weakness. "What do you want from me?" Olajide asked, his voice shaking. The Ajogun's smile faded, and his eyes narrowed. "I want nothing more from you, Olajide. You have already given me what I wanted. The bond of trust broken, the peace of Eliayo shattered. But the gods, the gods are watching now, and they are not pleased." The wind howled louder, and the flame in the lantern went out, plunging the hut into darkness. For a moment, Olajide was alone, his breath coming in short gasps. Then, as quickly as it had arrived, the wind stopped. The hut was silent. The stranger was gone. But his words lingered in the air, wrapping around Olajide like a suffocating cloak. That night, Olajide didn't sleep. He sat on his mat, his hands trembling, staring at the shadows that danced on the walls of his hut. He thought of Afolabi, of the blood oath they had sworn under the Iroko tree, and of the Ajogun's warning. The gods are watching now. For the first time, Olajide realized that his betrayal was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The village of Ile-Ayo had returned to its usual rhythm, or so it seemed on the surface. The sun rose and fell, the marketplace hummed with life, and the elders still gathered under the Iroko tree to share stories. But something had changed. The air felt heavier, and a strange unease had settled over the land. Olajide felt it most of all. Ever since the Ajogun had revealed his true nature, the world around him seemed darker, as though the shadows stretched longer and the wind carried whispers he couldn't understand. He avoided the Iroko tree, the sacred spot where he and Afolabi had sworn their oath of brotherhood. Its towering branches, once a source of comfort, now loomed like an accusation over him. It was on one of these uneasy mornings that the first sign of the curse appeared. The villagers had gathered in the square to discuss the state of the river. For weeks now, the once flowing water had slowed to a trickle. Women who went to fetch water complained that the stream was muddy and stagnant, and many had started whispering that the gods were angry. "This has never happened before," one elder said, shaking his head. "Not even during the dry season." Another elder frowned. "The gods are indeed displeased. Perhaps someone among us has broken their laws." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Olajide stood at the edge of the crowd, his heart pounding. He avoided the elders' gaze, but he could feel the weight of their words pressing down on him. As the meeting ended, one of the women pointed to the Iroko tree. "Even the sacred tree is changing," she said. "Its branches are blackening and its leaves are falling. What does this mean?" The villagers turned to look. The great Iroko tree, which had stood tall and green for generations, now looked sickly. Its once thick canopy was thinning, and the leaves that remained were dry and brittle. The bark, once smooth and strong, was darkened with cracks that oozed a strange sticky sap. The elders exchanged worried glances. "This is not ordinary," one of them said gravely. "The Iroko tree is sacred. If it is withering, it is a sign that something is very wrong." The villagers murmured amongst themselves, their fear growing. Olajide stood frozen, his mouth dry. The sight of the dying tree made his stomach churn. He thought of the blood oath he and Afolabi had sworn beneath its branches, and the Ajogun's warning. The gods are watching now. As the sacred Iroko tree withers, the villagers grow restless, and the gods are watching. What will happen next? Will Olajide and Afolabi face the wrath of their oath? Or is something even more sinister lurking? Make sure to like this video if you're captivated by the story so far, and subscribe to join us for part 2, where the mystery deepens and secrets are revealed. Don't miss what's coming next. Hit the notification bell so you'll be the first to see it when part 2 drops. And share this video with a friend who loves African tales of mystery and tradition. We'll see you in part 2. The gods are waiting. Are you ready?